strategies.com. I would now like to introduce you to today's presenter, Melissa Carter. As a Senior Director of Learning Solutions, Melissa consults with clients from a range of industries about their performance improvement needs. She oversees multiple cross-functional teams that design, develop, and deliver custom training and helps ensure instructional quality of solutions developed. Her focus is to help teams and clients have a strong performance and learner-centric approach that helps employees and businesses be successful. Melissa attended Florida State University, where she earned a master's in instructional systems technology and completed doctoral work. She currently resides in Corvallis, Oregon. Melissa, with that, I will go ahead and turn presenter rights over to you.
Well, thanks so much for that introduction, Kayla. Welcome everyone today. We're going to dive right into the presentation and get going about our topic today, which is individualized learning experiences. So I want to start off by just setting the stage for what does that take? Learners, as always, they always have been. They're unique individuals. They come in many shapes, sizes, flavors, and we have a variety of ways of building better individualized learning experiences for them. But what does it really take? I think certainly there's technology involved, but more than that, there's having a learner-centric focus. Really having training organizations that focus on the learners, their perspectives, their needs, really what the experience is for them, their connections to the jobs, that really learner-centric, not teacher-centric approach. And there's been lots of discussion these days, and we even had an excellent webinar on design thinking that really helps us develop learner personas, create empathy for learners. Really elaborating on that is key to an individualized approach. I think setting a growth mindset within the companies and organizations to individualize learning, encouraging individuals to take charge of their own professional growth is key. We also need to give them the tools and encouragement to do that, to take on new challenges and learn new skills. Also encouraging that culture of leaning in, of where others people encourage the growth of others they work with. So having that learning culture and growth mindset is key. Flexibility is also key. Individualized is not the one-size-fits-all, and being comfortable with that is key to both the learning experience as well as the training organization as they develop training and curriculums to create things that are flexible and have that tolerance of variation and multiple paths to achieve end results. So setting the stage for that, what I'm going to talk about today are 3 ways of approaching individualizing learning: differentiated, personalized, and adaptive. Probably most of you have been hearing a lot about adaptive learning. It's on several different people's lists for a top trend for 2018, so we'll probably spend most of our time on that. But I do want to talk about a couple other ways to set the stage. So first of all, differentiated learning. And that's pretty basic, and maybe you've been doing this already in different ways. Typically, it's this preset category, typically aligned to different job roles. The classic is you go into online learning experience and select your role, and then you get that version of the course. Maybe it's also a regional difference, and you select your region. You may also have situations where this one where you have that kind of left-hand navigation organization that learners can see the different perspectives. In this example, people managers versus legal professionals versus operations or sales, and people select the one that applies to them and get that version of the course. There's perhaps introductory module that's the same for everyone, and then custom modules based on roles. Sometimes people are double-headed, and it's good for them to see both modules that apply to their double hat roles. And also sometimes it's good for them to see different perspectives and allow that option. The select at the beginning obviously only gives you access to one version. You'd have to re-enter and go back in to see a second one. So that's just kind of basic differentiated learning strategy for individualizing the learning at just a very high level. A little bit deeper level are what we call differentiated learning, or personalized learning. And that personalized learning approach has a little bit of more rule-based. There's some decision trees based on learner input. So in this example, the course begins with a variety of questions. Do you work in the legal department? Do you regularly interact with competitors? Do you attend trade conferences? So this course, based on how you answer those questions, then gives you the appropriate version of the course, you know, and so you only get the content that will apply to you. So that differentiated learning helps individualize things a little bit more than the personalized example. It's still not, you know, there's several versions, but it's not totally individualized, but it gets at it a little bit better. Another thing we're seeing somewhat related to the personalized is that recommendations, kind of a la the Amazon of, you took this course, you might also like this. This is just an example from Coursera, but other LMSs are doing that more. So still adhering to that kind of rule-based, based on kind of if this, then that, learners are getting some personalized recommendations about additional courses to take. So those are some basic things that we've been doing as training developers for a long time. But adaptive learning, you may be hearing more about that these days, is been around for a while, but it's an approach that is really data-driven, and it's based on learner performance and confidence. And so it's based on how learners answer questions and their confidence in answering that, and we'll go into a few examples of that. But just setting the stage about an adaptive learning strategy, we are seeing it more these days as technology has advanced and there's increasing possibilities. It uses a computer-based technology. Obviously, our computer capabilities keep increasing. There's more bigger, cheaper databases available. There's greater capabilities and calculation power for algorithms and artificial intelligence. And so this is allowing us to use computer-based technology to modify the content in real time based on learner behaviors and interactions. As I briefly said, it has been used in more of the educational arena a lot. It kind of began there. That space has larger audiences, you know, huge masses of students in, you know, elementary, high school, college. They have some more standardized courses. Publishers such as McGraw-Hill, Pearson, and others have been heavily involved in pushing forward innovations in adaptive learning because they're so heavily involved in the educational arena, and also they have large bodies of content to leverage and help integrate with an adaptive learning approach. So lots has been done over the years, probably since 60s and 70s with adaptive learning as it's grown in the higher ed space, but we are seeing it now more in the corporate space. No matter what space it's being used in, it works. It teaches by asking questions. So it kind of flips the model of tell, then practice to ask first, then tell or read or listen or whatever the content is presented in, and then practice what you don't know. I do want to make a clarifying point. Adaptive learning isn't adaptive testing. That's not what we're talking about today. The goal of adaptive learning is to teach, not to test. There are things, adaptive learning, like the GREs and SATs, where based on how you respond to early questions, you get harder or easier questions based on your level of proficiency. But that's not what we're talking about today, not that adaptive testing. We're really focusing on adaptive learning. Because it focuses on those questions so critically, the learning objectives behind those questions also become critical. All the questions have to be tied to a learning objective, so getting those right and getting those at a fairly granular level becomes critical to making adaptive learning work. You've got to have multiple questions per objective because learners will they get something and they don't get it right, they may get a different version of it later on after they've reviewed some content. And the key attribute of adaptive learning is this: the learner experience is personal and efficient. It's based on how the learner answers questions, whether it's correct or incorrect, and whether confident or not. And it becomes more efficient because they're only directed to content that they don't understand. So what they do understand, they skip over, making the core learning typically take less time. So let's dive into a few examples. Oh, but first I want to talk about the platform and how these typically work. Again, they're based on large databases and algorithms behind them. Don't ask me to quote any of the algorithms. There's lots of mathematics and programming behind them. But typically it's around accuracy. Is the answer to the question correct or incorrect? There's also a confidence factor, which is very characteristic of adaptive learning as opposed to just testing. How confident was the learner when they answered the question? Sometimes time is also included in the algorithm. How long did they take to answer? And then depending on the system that's used, there may be other variables such as level of engagement, what content they've interacted with as they go through the adaptive learning. So a few examples from, there's many partners we have around adaptive learning. These happen to be from Area 9. And this is a onboarding course basically for a company called Shinola out of Detroit that does fabulous custom really craftsmanship work around creating originally watches, and they do bikes and a whole variety of things. And so you can see a learner is welcomed in the course, gets some audio, and then they're off and they continue. And the first thing they get after a brief introduction is some questions. This isn't, the samples I'm showing are not in exact order, they're just selections. But one of the immediate things you'll see is this question, but also at the bottom is the confidence factor. I know it, I think so, I know it, I'm unsure, or no idea. And then the feedback you get will tell you what you got right and what you got wrong, and where you are weak, you will then get suggested resources. The adaptive learning has a variety, a whole range of samples, drag and drops, multiple choice, fill in the blank. So you can see a couple different versions here. But again, each time the learner not only answers the question, but their confidence in answering it. Here's another sample. This one is from a course that's about wine. So for all you sommeliers out there or wannabe sommeliers, again, fill in the blank question. I answered only partially correct, getting my white wines mixed up. And now I have a resource to a slide to refer to really understand the different kinds of grapes and review something before moving on. As a learner not getting something right, I will then get another question of this later on. Now, another key factor in adaptive learning is a variety of reports. And the learner has access to this. This is, again, you know, that empowering the learner, creating that growth mindset. They can look at a variety of things, including, you know, what are my scores across different topics in this course? What are the questions I missed? What are the most challenging learning objectives for me? And here's a report on the kind of confidence and variations of what the learner was, what they got, you know, correct, and they were confident about it. They knew they knew it. What didn't they get right, but they kind of knew they didn't get it right. The unconsciously competent with they got right, but they were unaware that they knew it. And then the area that is most interesting and the, a plus of adaptive learning is exposing that unconsciously incompetent. They answered incorrectly, but they really thought they had it right. And so these attributes of really exposing the different level of learning helps build confidence in the learner. Also, where they are unconsciously incompetent or they got something wrong that they thought they got right, that really sets the learner up to be more receptive to the learning, to really hone in on, okay, I didn't know this. Let me really understand it better and dive into that content with that intent. So as we have a few minutes left, I want to leave some time for questions. I do want to summarize some of the pros and cons of adaptive learning, and some of these things I think are both. We've talked about it's more efficient learning. People are getting just the content that they really need to know, so there's more efficient time spent and quicker time to mastery. Adaptive learning is particularly good for kind of knowledge, even application and rule-based and scenario-based content, but can be challenging for soft skills. Interacting with the computer, getting some feedback, getting access to content is great, but where you really need to build skills and interact with people, some leadership things, some role-playing things, those still may be best for other learning modalities. As the databases build and work better with large amounts of data, that's good. If it's a very narrow topic, a small audience, adaptive learning may not be appropriate. There have been concerns, particularly in the K-12 college areas, around who owns this data, and as the database is built, that may also be a privacy concern in corporate environments, particularly with countries like Germany and France with tighter restrictions on personal information. Sometimes an issue, just something to be aware of. As I talked about in the previous slide, the adaptive learning is great for building confidence in learners, and that exposure of that unconscious incompetence can also be a tool for coaches or teachers to then really help the person dive deeper into an area that they thought they really got, but they didn't quite. So learners, we've got lots of different types. At the beginning we said, what does it take? I talked about a couple different mindsets to have. So now I pose the question to you, what do you want to make? Something for you to ponder after this webinar. We now have a few minutes for questions.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. That was a great presentation. I know a lot of the themes, if we look over our learning trends for 2018 that we've been discussing over about the past month and a half, they've all been around learner-centric approaches, and this one kind of hits the mark on that. So before I dive into the questions, I do want to remind everyone that if you have a question for Melissa, go ahead and put it into the Q&A module that's in the lower right-hand panel of WebEx. And obviously, there's a lot that we covered in 20 minutes, and still more that could be discussed, so we encourage you to share the conversation with Melissa beyond today's session. Her contact information is available on the slide deck. There you go. Thank you, Melissa. And she's available to talk to you after today's webinar. And we also wanted to remind you that we will be sending everyone a link to a follow-up blog post where Melissa will be addressing some of today's key takeaways and the questions that come up in the Q&A portion. And finally, the recording and slides from today will be sent to you to the email address that you provided when you registered in the next 48 hours. So it looks like we do have some questions coming in. I'll go ahead and jump into those. The first one is, are there subjects that are better suited for adaptive learning than others?
Yeah, that clear rule-based, the ones with generally more black and white answers. Math is a huge area in the adaptive learning space. A lot of progress being made there, both in the high school and college setting, which isn't to say it's restricted to that type of topic, but the topics with lots of gray areas and more nuance, I think are less appropriate for adaptive learning.
And so two questions came in. They're similar. They're a little bit different, so I'm going to read them both to you, but they are semi-similar. So I'll go ahead and have you answer them together. But the first one is adaptive learning a good training solution by itself, or does it need instructor support? And with that, the second question is, do these adaptive learning practices translate into ILT in virtual and physical classrooms? This person can readily see the application to self-paced learning, but what about a corporate leadership development workshop, for example?
I think adaptive learning is, and this is more my personal and experience of, I think it's great in a blended learning solution for perhaps some kind of fairly focused things, self-directed, in and out, but in the larger context, and this is what we're hearing more and more in the field, we need to design learning experiences, and I see adaptive learning as part of that experience, supplemented by coaching, supplemented by peer learning, you know, or an ILT or VILT. So there's a lot to be learned, both the learner themselves individually, but data can be taken also from the adaptive learning to then really hone more effective VILT or ILT experiences. I think adaptive learning course can be used as a great pre-learning experience to get everybody up to speed on a certain topic or skill, and then you can support it with some on-the-job or other things, and then you kind of know everybody is at the same level. How they've gotten there with, you know, a day of taking an adaptive learning course or a week of adaptive learning course doesn't matter, but you know that they've gotten through something. So I think it's great. It has a lot of exciting possibilities. It's got great efficiency. It helps get around the one-size-fits-all model that rarely does fit all. But I still think it generally needs some blended learning with it to really have you know, really great impact on the job.
And tying into this as well, there are several different types of learning models out there and methodologies. How can we address the different types of learning methodologies with adaptive learning?
I'm not sure I'm getting that question as far as learning methodologies being different modalities or different approaches as like more didactic, experiential. I kind of go back to, again, it's the blended solution to work and blend it with other methodologies. It I think helps empower learners. It gets them through some content. But yeah, blending it with other methodologies achieves the best success.
Perfect. And this one might be something that we want to do some side research on, but as far as, do you know of any specific research validating the algorithms that are mentioned specifically because this person mentioned it seems like if we're finding quicker time to mastery that there's likely some research behind it. Do you happen to know of any?
Yeah, let me follow up on that. I can't directly cite some off of my head, but yeah, there's a variety of things both in the educational setting and the corporate setting that talk about different time to mastery of learning the content. So we'll follow up on that.
Perfect. And we have one more question that came in. I want to be mindful that we are 5 minutes over with this Q&A. I'll go ahead and do this last question. If you do have a question for Melissa, though, still be sure to enter it into the chat field or the Q&A. What we'll do is I'll send these over to her. She'll be addressing them in that blog post, so they will be addressed. And then we'll send that out to everybody who has registered for the webinar. So the final question is, and of course I'm sure there are a lot out there, can you name some types of software? I know we gave some examples today of software that are commonly being used for adaptive learning.
Well, we showed some from Area 9. McGraw-Hill has been big in the educational space, but also the corporate space. There's, from what I've seen, a lot, you know, you can arrange it however you want, but it looks fairly similar. Newton with, I believe they were partnered with Pearson. has done some things. Smart Sparrow is another vendor for adaptive learning. Dreambox. And I'm sure there's new ones emerging every day.
I figured that would be the answer. So with that, I do want to thank everyone for your time and attention. Thank you again to today's speaker, Melissa Carter. And we hope that you'll join us again for future Learning Trends webinars. We have topics coming up such as digital learning, content curation, micro-learning, and more. Registration is available on our webinar page at gpstrategies.com, and former webinars are on our recordings page as well if you haven't had a chance to dive into any of the webinars that we've had so far this year. We do encourage you to listen to those. So with that, thank you again and have a great day.